Okay, I'm going to answer some questions from discussion board 5, and my apologies for the way I sound. I do have a terrible cold. I don't know where I got it from at this time of the summer, but I didn't luck out. So let's have a look. First two questions are kind of similar. One from Zach. Have there been any studies on the level of motivation based on negative versus positive speeches from coaches? And then another question from Matt. In sports, has there been any research on the success of teams, individuals who trash talk in relation to those who don't? Um, in terms of motivation, there has been attempted research. Nothing specifically in terms of trash talk. These are particular behaviors that are very difficult to measure as a variable by themselves influencing other variables when you have many other variables involved. Um, it's very difficult to isolate the actions of a coach or the actions of players in terms of trash talk when you think of all the other things that go into making a winning team. And perhaps the biggest variable that goes into winning to make a winning team is luck. It's a kind of an impossible experiment to be able to create in many ways because you don't know exactly what you are testing. Um, let's contrast that with analytics, and you know analytics through the movie, which is based upon the real life situation in baseball. It was known as Moneyball, in which was it Oakland baseball team didn't have much money to spend, and so they decided to go with analytics to decide which players to get, and they had a very successful time of it, and you probably saw the movie. Similarly, in soccer, there's been lots of different studies. It's very popular at the moment using analytics, and this is a particular book which I found pretty interesting. Why everything you know about soccer is wrong. It's called The Numbers Game. And it's Chris Anderson and David Sally. And what this particular book does is explode a lot of popular myths that people in the game and people watching the game tend to share. A couple of the things that they discovered through analytics, through the measuring things when you can measure things, is that it's the weaker players rather than the stronger players that have a bigger impact on a team's points tally at the end of a season. So it's not that, for example, with Liverpool last year when Suarez was playing for them, he was clearly their strongest player. It wasn't so much him that added to their points tally, but it was the weaker players. How fewer weaker players do you have in your team, and how many mistakes they make? And then, of course, also this did give some credence to the notion that the coach does have some impact upon their players as well. But the biggest single issue in terms of affecting a team's success was luck. So I'm not answering your question. What I'm saying is that you can only, in a sense, measure what is measurable so that you can isolate that variable and then begin to see how that impacts particular things like success. Here's a question from Kaylee. In what ways have modern technology and media changed sports, announcer talk, trash talk, and motivational talk? For example, one popular way to use trash talk today is through the making of internet memes that involve pictures or GIFs of players. Right. And I think you've answered the question yourself, haven't you, really? It's had a tremendous impact. Josh gave a nice response here when he talked about trash talk, or perhaps what I would call heckling. Trash talk, in my opinion, Josh says, has evolved from something that occurs just on the field of play to something that is woven into the nature of sports itself. Student sections and fans often push the limits of this newly woven aspect of sport. Take Ohio University's Ozone, for example. The leaders of the Ozone spend countless hours preparing chants for basketball games, using social media and internet sources to gather sensitive information about opposing players. The leaders will often provide members of the Ozone with pamphlets so that the whole student section can chant trash talk with them. These pamphlets frequently end up in the general fan sections so that the fans may join in with the Ozone. And that's a great example, Josh. And what Josh is specifically identifying there is the way that othering, and we've talked about othering through chance, is taken to the next level where you find out some minute little details about a player. And we're not talking about nationally known players, because if it's the Bobcats playing Miami, then what is discovered there is something about a player who's maybe broken up with his girlfriend a few weeks ago, and so you can use a chant in which you mention the name of the girlfriend, and you can imagine what kind of psychological damage, impact that can inflict on a player's confidence. Josh says, have there been different studies conducted on sport announcer talks based on the various vehicles of communication, TV versus radio? What about the different positions filled by sports announcers, play-by-play versus color commentator? So the play-by-play is the commentator who just describes the sequence of events. The color commentator provides evaluation. And that's kind of connecting with Kaylee when she talks about technology, and that's how that has changed sports announcer talk. I don't have a lot of knowledge of these particular studies, but here's one particular study. This was done about 10 or so years ago. And what they did in this study is to take 10 minutes of a basketball game. This was North Carolina State University playing Florida State University. And they transcribed the first 10 minutes, and so there was a TV broadcast, and then also there was a separate radio broadcast. So they were able to have transcripts of both and then compare the two. And you can see the results there, and I've kind of made it a little too small. The black is the radio, and the lighter color is the TV broadcast. And what you'll find is things like evaluation is much greater on the TV, and talk about strategy and things like that. And that probably seems to be true, I think, that TV affords more time to provide color, as we've described it before, than radio does. So in a sense, radio is more the play-by-play, with very little time for the color that TV can provide, because of course TV, you're looking at pictures. One interesting thing for me in the increasing broadcasting of soccer on American TV is that many of the commentators, the American commentators, are using the same style of commentating as would be found on football in the NFL. One difference, of course, is with football there are lots of breaks, lots of stops and starts. which gives time for lots of color or evaluation. But you don't get that with soccer. It's a game that can flow very fast with very few kind of breaks to make those kind of evaluations. So one thing I found, and I've found this especially with the coverage of the Women's World Cup that's going on at the moment, is that the play-by-play commentator often goes in to provide the color as well. So there's far too much talk, as far as I'm concerned, compared with, say, British commentators, and of course they've been doing it for a lot longer time, so they've been able to develop their craft. But it seems to be that there's far too much talking, and that's the style of commentating that's been taken from football. Works great with football because you have all those breaks, all those replays that you can talk over, but it doesn't work with soccer. And then one last question from Yanlin. Do you think trash talk can be positive sometimes? How? I don't know what you're thinking about there. My reaction would be that it has to be negative. Although it can be claimed that trash talk amongst team members helps build a certain camaraderie and build a certain level of motivation amongst each other. Trash talker is a game of eloquence, of verbal skill. So that in itself is a very positive thing. But for the most part, I have to think that it's a pretty negative way of behaving in sport. I guess it depends on what's at stake. It's not something that I ever involve myself in. There are certain people who can do it and certain people who can't. But I have a very negative view of it. Okay, thanks for those questions.